Hello, good afternoon. We are excited to be having a conversation with Gladys Muñoz Romero. And Gladys is going to tell us a bit about who they are in a little bit, but my name is Adesor Igbeneweka. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Director for Career Equity and Access here at Suffolk University. And I'm joined by my colleague, Adeleke.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Adeleke. I'm a grad fellow at the Career Center. I work with the Career Equity and Access strand, and I'm glad to be here today. Thank you.
First of all, Gladys, could you tell us who you are and tell us how you identify as we celebrate Hispanic and Latinx Heritage Month?
Yes, of course. I'm so excited to be here. How do I describe myself? Well, to summarize, I identify as Latina, a woman, and an entrepreneur and a business owner. I definitely would say that my background, my family and I migrated from Peru, which is located in South America, and we settled in Miami, Florida, where I lived all the way up to my undergraduate degree. My family, even though we're from Peru, we're mixed race, meaning that my dad is Black and Japanese, and my mom is mestiza, which means I'm indigenous and white. So if you ever have a chance to go visit Lima, Peru, it's a plethora of different identities, just because we have a lot of different ancestries from China, Cantonese, Arabic, West African. So that's how I would say. I think just being over the last few years, I've come to realize that part of my identity as Latina, definitely as someone who is part of a diverse within a diverse community. And yeah, that's all about my identity.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no denying that identity impacts one's professional life. So how has the aspect of identity impacted your academic and career path so far?
Yeah, of course. So my background is both in public health and social economic justice. So my undergraduate and graduate degrees first are in public health. Definitely, I think one of the privilege that I have compared to other Latinx individuals living in the United States is that I've grown within community, meaning that as someone who lives in Miami, Spanish is a pretty common language, right? And then for my graduate level education living in Southern California, once again, Spanish was the second most common language, right? And so I think me navigating these spaces within our community of Latinidad, right? It's definitely easier for me to build connections and also understand people's like where they're from, right? So for example, when I lived in Southern California, I was exposed to the Filipino culture because I had a friend in grad school who looked similarly like to me, right? And I was like, "Oh, you're Peruvian too," and she's like, "No, I'm Filipina." And so that's when we started talking about our identities. That she and I could probably blend in both of our different countries and fit in, but we actually have, different tongues, and that because Spain colonized the Philippines and all that aspect, right? But I think for my professional life, I would say that it definitely has impacted my level of work, especially when it comes to, disparities in financial capital for historically marginalized communities that want to become entrepreneurs, and definitely in the healthcare sector where you do see terrible healthcare outcomes within Black, Indigenous, people of color, Hispanic compared to white folks. So definitely, I think that's always been a drive for me to be a change agent with the support of the community based on what they need. And now, currently at Suffolk, I'm a part-time MBA student. So I definitely think that one of my experiences that I bring to the classroom is how I see the world, right? Because in business school, you're instructed to learn about all these different pieces, right? Like human resources, operation, accounting. And so someone for me who comes from a different lens, it was a transition, but not to say it wasn't bad. I think it was something that I needed to grow more in my professional identity. So for example, I learned innovation design thinking, one of my courses with Professor Barry Bendel. And that to me was it's one of my favorite classes to date because it taught me a lot how to be innovative and how can I bring that to my community. So because of that, I'm actually having my own innovative workshop for women of color next month in Salem, just because that's a way that I can give back to.
Okay, so my next question is very similar because I see that you answered quite a bit, but maybe we'll take it a different way.
Yeah.
How would you say that your identity as a Latina has empowered you?
Ooh. I would say it stems from all my resiliency, definitely being an immigrant to the United States, living here in these interesting times, I would say definitely gives me the fuel to keep going, and also being part of a growing community in the United States. So, now that it's Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month, I was kind of reflecting about what's been going on, and I learned that, the Latino community has a huge economic power alongside Black and African Americans in the United States. And so it's like, how can we be more empowered to do these things so we can better ourselves in our lives? And I also do want to thank the women in my life and my parents, obviously, teaching me their morals, values, and beliefs. And my parents, before immigrating to the United States, were professionals in their country, like engineering and education. So it's always been ingrained in me to keep pursuing knowledge. And yeah, and I always love to share about my Peruvian culture.
Love it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think also you've shed like a little light on some of your academic endeavors and some of the experiences you've gotten in the classroom, like mentioning one of your favorite class and one of your favorite professors. So this next question, perhaps there's maybe another highlight in your academic journey that you deemed successful and has shaped your career trajectory so far.
So when I served as a Peace Corps and volunteer in the Western Highlands of Guatemala in a small indigenous village of 12,000 people, Peace Corps on its own was definitely a life-changing experience, and it was one of the hardest jobs I ever had, especially living in a community, right? Even though Spanish is my first language, most of the individuals there, their first language is not Spanish, it's an indigenous dialect called Quiche. And fun fact, the community residents there, when they immigrate to the United States, settle in Lynn, Massachusetts, or New Bedford, Massachusetts, or Providence, Rhode Island. And it's really funny how I ended up here in New England, because I'm originally from Florida. But one of my favorite highlights of being a Peace Corps volunteer was co-writing a grant with UNICEF and other NGOs to do student health promoter camps. So we had a 2-day workshop for the students to learn how to be a student leader. And we taught them activities with their school advisor and their principal. And that was the first time you definitely see kids coming in and learning how to be a leader so they can do a training back at their schools. So that was definitely one of my highlights. And also part of being a Peace Corps volunteer is learning all these training skills. So you learn how to do many trainings, many icebreakers, and also being creative, right, with limited resources. So that's definitely, I still keep in contact with everybody on Facebook as needed. Yeah.
Awesome. Are you aware of any policy or industry changes that positively impact employees who identify as Hispanic or Latinx? Or are there things that you've seen in your career path that you feel like if we did X, we would make much improvements? Especially, I can imagine in your work in healthcare, that there will be quite a bit.
Yes, I would say with healthcare, it's a very different industry compared to finance or business or all these other industries. I would say from the healthcare lens, policies are enacted for a reason. Like, for example, within our communities, if you speak a second language, historically, healthcare facilities would ask people to translate. And now, 30 plus years now, we're caught up, you can't do that. So even though I'm trained as a medical interpreter in the state of Florida, I will not translate, right? Because one, I don't know the terminology for this field, and also that's out of my scope. So just being mindful of that. It's different when, example, Latino patients ask me at the hospital for directions. That's different, right? Because we have common tongue. And of course, I'm happy to be a good, diligent employee and, just be nice and point them their way. But thinking about those pieces, especially when you have a skill, right? And this one's a technical skill, it's a second language, and just being mindful of that in the workplace. And I also encourage individuals that if you're applying for a job and you have that second language skill that they require, ask for an increase during salary negotiations, right? Because that is a huge skill that they're needing. And ask for the bilingual pay. Like it's really important, especially in the work that you're doing. You need to advocate for yourself. Now, in the business lines, there's going to be different policies depending on what field you work. Since my focus is small business owners of color, there are definitely more policies in place. So for example, if you were now filing for an LLC, which is a limited liability corporation, as most business owners do, right? In the state of Massachusetts, you do it online, and then you have 30 business days to file a form with the federal government to let them know that you have no additional policies or you're not a risk, right? And this was implemented January 1st, 2024. Do you think our community knows that? No, especially when there's barriers. So if you want to complete this form, you can only do it online. It's called the BOEI filing form, and it's only available through the US server government from 8 to 4:30. So thinking about these small business owners, that if that's your bread and butter, do you think you have time to do your administrative tasks like this? Maybe, maybe not. So I think there's a lot of barriers in that industry, and it's really hard to keep tabs of what is coming up, what's not coming up. And so that's why I'm dedicated to that work as well.
Yep. Thank you so much. We all know how important social capital is, and so I would like to know how did social capital influence your career and success?
So that is a great question that I actually talked to some colleagues of mine who are Latino as well, because I'm going to be moderating Dana-Farber Cancer Institute Latinx panel next Monday. And we talked about social capital, how in our community, we don't really leverage that. So we're taught to be demure, especially I can speak from my experience as a woman in the Latino community. We're taught to be demure, to be soft-spoken, to not raise the status quo, to follow gender role expectations, right? And my family and my parents didn't raise me that way. And so when I think about social capital, if I was aligned to those social constructs, would I be where I am? Maybe, maybe not. But I think to this day, our social capital is not utilized enough. So for example, one of my friends shared with me that they hosted a party for their white friends versus their Latino friends, because they're sociologists by trade. And they found out within the white folks space, and this is from their experience, not to generalize among a group, that they were all networking. Whereas with the Latino group, it was just a different, it was just community, you're having fun, playing dominoes, cooking. And so it was really fascinating to hear. I'm like, yeah, because when I go to these spaces, I wasn't introduced to networking or building those strong social ties, right? Until I went to university, decades ago now. And now it's we are the largest minority group in the United States. Spanish is the second most common language. We drive an economic force at this current time from the data. So how can we leverage that social capital, right? And so I've been fortunate enough that because have an outgoing personality and being curious and a learner, I want to know what's more out there. That learnability piece has never left me, right? And I always try to connect people instead of gatekeeping, because within communities, especially if you come from a historically marginalized community, there's so many systems in place for you to access healthcare or, get a loan for your business. And so how do we dismantle those walls so we can actually work together to a common goal? And that's why, like, I joined the North Shore Latino Business Association, which is very different than traditional chambers of commerce, because there you're trying to connect each other. So this past Sunday, when I went to their Hispanic Heritage Month gala, I met all these Peruvian entrepreneurs, and it was so funny how I sat on the Peruvian table and they were also talking about how they don't network either. And I'm like, well, you kind of have to if you want to get clients and, keep growing.
Absolutely. I think that sometimes we think of networking as this thing that is not natural, whereby it really is, because we're networking all the time. Every time you meet a new person, you're building a connection. And so I think that we have to remember that and make it less stressful, because I remember, thinking that networking was about, asking for something, right? Or building the relationship so you could ask for something. But sometimes getting to know people as, business owners, professionals, neighbors, partners, that's part of networking, because you're not going to connect with someone who is a stranger and just ask for advice or ideas. It's when you've said hello to somebody and you have and you develop a relationship, then it feels so much easier to ask for advice, to share ideas and things like that. And so in the spirit of sharing ideas, asking for advice, we know that follows through in the workplace with things like mentorship. And I am wondering, how have mentors been effective in your career and academic pursuit?
So I will be fully honest, I've never had a formal mentor where you sign up for a program and you lead on a weekly basis, because I never saw that. Because we have to be a good fit. Now, my way of giving back is doing that, mentoring, undergrads, but I've had more informal mentors. So in the sense of people, like, one of my favorite professors in undergrad was a first-gen Puerto Rican woman. And so she taught me a lot about public health and how to do research. Deidre Aureolia, shout out. And she, that was a mentor for me, because she taught me a lot of how to navigate as a first-gen student, immigrant, first language is Spanish, like going to university by yourself, right? And so that's always been a informal mentor to me now, because we've, known each other, seen our kids grow up. And I think when I was in California, definitely seeing a lot of Latino Chicana scholars as well. I never did that because in Florida, it was a different field that I chose, right? And so I would say that it's always been informal, but I've always managed to close the loop and engage with them, and also highlighting their successes too. Now I like to give back in mentorship. Currently, I don't have the time, right? But I think now my goal has shifted to mentor and coach small business owners from my community.
I love that. But sometimes I think too that mentoring doesn't have to be formal, because most of the time it's the people that we admire that we reach out to who become mentors. So I love that, even though it hasn't been a formalized thing for you, but you have just gravitated towards it and now you're giving back. So thank you.
Yes, I think it goes a long way, honestly, to grow and keep connections. And it's hard to put yourself out there, especially if you're not taught the skills, or, you grew up in an environment that's like, why are you going to ask for help? You're supposed to figure it out on your own. It's like, no, you spend more time thinking of what you should have done than actually doing it. So when I met Ade, which was so random this past summer, at this Latinx entrepreneurship pitch competition, it was just like, oh, and then here we are.
Absolutely. I always say we're all strangers until we say hello.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your work experience in the health sector and your work with identity-based group. So could you shed more light on your responsibilities in this work this work position?
Yeah, so I would say in Peace Corps, it was more of a technical, so a lot of trainings, a lot of coordination, a lot of planning. For those that have worked in international development, you know that you don't do what you want to do, you work with the community needs. And so in Peace Corps, the school calendar is different in the United States. And you also have to add in a factor during farming season when there's lower attendance rate in schools, right? And so how to adjust to that. Currently, I have I work as a project manager at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in the Cancer Care Equity Program. And that work is more about supporting the patient navigator and the oncology nurse navigator to link patients who have limited English proficiency and have state Medicaid to get colorectal cancer screening, because there is a loss to follow-up when patients are, referred to these screening services. They're not being followed, and even national trend data show that. So that's what our work does. Being a project manager, especially in number one, where we're supporting is in northern Massachusetts in the Merrimack Valley region, which has a high percentage of limited English proficiency folks that speak Spanish, majority Arabic, Vietnamese. So there's like all these different language there. And so we try to provide a culturally tailored patient navigation service. So for example, what I do in my day-to-day is, okay, did we enter these patients from this clinic? Did you all, make the first outreach attempts? It's a lot of reports, and it's a lot of meetings with community stakeholders, because you can't just start a program. Like, this work has been going on for the past 3 years, and just to do a program takes time, especially in the community health development world.
Thank you. So when Adeleke was doing his research, one of the things that kept coming up that he mentioned was that you highlight the importance of equity in your work. So can you tell us how, or give us some examples of how you promote equity in your work and how we could do better as a society?
So for me, I guess I've always been political. I like to voice my feedback and areas of improvement. I think that's always been pretty much nature to me, even though I grew up in a household where that was not the case, right? And so over time, I've been more tactful and how to be more influent, be more influent so I can make sure we're all on the same page. I think a current example with equity is, for example, my freelance gig for consulting for business owners. Traditionally speaking, consulting is a very expensive service, especially if you just are a startup and you can't afford it. So after doing some market research and going around talking to these small business owners, I was like, does it make sense to have like a monthly fee? So number one, we set these expectations, and it kind of becomes a subscription service, because that way you don't have to pay like a capital fee of $20,000 for a project base, and so we can just keep that communication. So for me, that's ensuring access and making sure equity, because one, I'm privileged to have this education from healthcare, to entrepreneurship, to innovation. And so how can I bring that to my community, right? Not to say what other consultants who charge you pay for your service, but I think for me, it's like, how can I make this like a long-term goal of mine, to make it more accessible? Because the US government, the Small Business Administration, has all of these entrepreneurship programs, but they're, one, always waitlist. Two, they're very high literacy. So even if English is your second language, you probably don't understand what they're talking about. And three, it's very inaccessible. And so you have a huge demographic that's a driving economic force in the United States. How do you meet them where they're at? And a lot of people don't like to break down those systems. So that's where I come in my work. As far as society, I think a lot of us like to be curious and ask questions that are not okay. So what I like to say is, I invite you to reflect before you ask that question. And if you're feeling some type of discomfort, really think about why that is. And there's research, there's books, there's movies, you know, and since we are in the era of fact checking everything, definitely utilize websites. Like, for example, there's the Racial Equity Tools website that has a lot of DEI trainings that I recommend. And if you really want to be an ally or you don't know how to get there, definitely think about that and find within your networks and your social capital. Is there a workshop? Is there something? Because I think a lot of things are under attack right now, especially within the DEI lens. So how can we continue this work? Because this work has always been there. Now it's just like, how do we continue the momentum?
Thank you so much for sharing those very key tips that we could use in our workplaces. So the next question is, if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
My advice would be to not have any regrets and go for it. I think there's been a lot of times where I'm like hesitant because like I had to de-learn a lot of things. Like, for example, risk taking is not something I grew up with, right? Yes, immigration is risk taking, right? But it's always okay to be in your comfort zone. No, it's okay to think outside the box. If you want to do it, do it. Like, I'm exploring maybe being a Fulbright scholar, right? Like, I think that's a great idea. So how do I get there? And so don't have any regrets. If it's going to help you in one way to grow, then do it. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be in your 50s, which is fine. But if you still want to transition, do different things, it's okay too. So.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that we didn't ask that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, of course. So I would appreciate if anybody could follow, Inti Nova Consulting. That is my freelance gig. You can find it on Instagram, Facebook, and our website. And this fall, 2024, I'm doing a couple workshops for free in the Salem, Massachusetts area. If you're a small business owner that wants to learn how to understand your customers, touch point like journey mapping, how to be innovative, and how to tell your story, please feel free to reach out. I love cafecitos, coffee sessions too.
Well, we appreciate you and we look forward to doing quite a lot more with you. And I'll see you on the 9th for our career panel conversation that we are co-sponsoring. And thanks to you and our graduate student chapter for being partners on that as well. So thank you very much, Gladys.
Thank you so much.